And here with insider analysis of all of this and more is Vatican consultant for CBS News, priest of the Diocese of Assisi, Msgr Anthony Figueiredo. Msgr, thank you for being here. I want to get your take on some of what Ed just reported, starting with that shakeup at the CDF. Your thoughts on what amounts to a demotion of Archbishop Morandi. How should we interpret this change?
Well, Raymond, it's quite normal for popes to move curial officials. It's quite normal for popes to surround themselves with their own men. And as Ed was saying, I do believe this is part of the larger reform of the Curia. Pope Francis did meet with Cardinal Ladaria in December. He met with Archbishop Scicluna in December. In fact, he met with Cardinal Ladaria again today. So I believe he does want a new mission being given to the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. Interestingly enough, the only congregation that shares in the magisterium of the Pope is the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith. So in a sense, it's not surprising that a Pope wants to have more say in that congregation. I do think Archbishop Scicluna will be called either to be secretary, perhaps even prefect. He shares the Holy Father's views on a number of different issues, certainly on the whole issue of giving communion to the divorced and remarried, and even more importantly, on the sexual abuse. It was Archbishop Scicluna who carried out the investigation on the Legionaries of Christ in 2005, on the Chilean bishops in 2018, going back, Cardinal Keith O'Brien of Edinburgh in 2014, and he's been very much involved with Vos Estis Lux Mundi, the new norms being drawn up to call bishops to account who covered up abuse. Clearly, this seems to me as if Pope Francis wants a man who's going to reflect his own wishes. He wants to surround himself with a man who has his confidence.
I want to move on to that letter that now has been released that the Pope wrote to members of New Ways Ministry. This is a group that over the years is very controversial, has reached out to the LGBT community. John Paul II, Benedict, the U.S. bishops largely and roundly condemned that group. It seems the Pope has rehabilitated them with the embrace of Sister Janine Gramick and Father James Martin. What are you hearing in Italy, particularly among the seminary community? I know you spent a great deal of time at the NAC about the Vatican's new attitude toward these individuals that in previous days, their activities were considered outside the church teaching.
Well, we certainly know Pope Francis's vision of the church as a field hospital. We know his vision of the Most Holy Eucharist, not as a prize for the perfect, but as a medicine for those who are sick or unwell. We also know the clarity of church teaching on homosexual acts. They are intrinsically disordered. So the very use now of LGBT to describe a way of life that is being given credibility even by the church, quite frankly, is very confusing indeed. And we seem not to be catechizing the world as a church, but allowing the world to catechize us. So I think it's basically caused significant confusion. And you're absolutely right. It seems that those who have been asked to step aside in the past because of the confusion they bring into areas such as homosexual teaching are now being given new life. And I think that is pretty dangerous in the society we are living in at this time. I was speaking to a faculty member of a seminary back in the States, and he said, well, does this mean that our seminaries are now going to be filled with men who say, well, the gay lifestyle is being approved by the church? It's a big danger.
As Edward reported earlier, Father, Pope Francis has given multiple indications that he's supportive of vaccine mandates, even suggesting that there is a moral obligation, despite the CDF saying that there's not. Is there a disconnect here when the Vatican teaches that one can, in conscience, object to taking the vaccine, but then fires its own employees for refusing the Vatican mandate? And what do you make of the Vatican Secretary of State poo-pooing the demonstrable link between abortion and the creation of these vaccines?
Pope Francis was speaking to almost 200 diplomats when he used that term, moral obligation. He did not explain what he meant by that. So perhaps it's an invitation for further discernment, further deliberation on taking the vaccine or not. Something that's very interesting, Raymond, is that it seems to be part of a bigger picture. You know, we have the Italian Prime Minister this week mandating the vaccine for over 50s. We have the French president who says he's going to cheese off, he used stronger language, in fact, the non-vaxxers in France. We even had the conservative British Prime Minister talking about the mumbo-jumbo of non-vaxxers and the need to call them out. So I read it a little bit like there's a bigger picture here, that we have these leaders coming through, including Pope Francis, saying we're going to call these people out. You know, the words that Pope Francis used, in fact, and I have them here, he says, you know, baseless information or poorly documented facts. There just seems to be somewhat of a pattern there, and there may be an underlying manifesto amongst European leaders, certainly, in the sense of a response to non-vaxxers. In terms of Cardinal Parolin, you know, conscience, as we know, is a very serious matter, and positions based on conscience, I think, do need to be explained thoroughly. And I think, to defend Cardinal Parolin in some sense, you know, conscience cannot simply be used as an excuse to escape legitimate commands of authority. So yes, conscientious objection, but let's have your reasons for that. And if it's just part of a move to go against authority, I think then questions have to be raised about that as well.
Yeah. Well, and Monsignor, the Catechism, you are allowed autonomy over your body, and your conscience predominates. You're not forced to do something with your body that violates your conscience. So if people want to not take a vaccine, that's their prerogative, frankly, to my reading of church teaching at least. And when the Pope talks about misinformed individuals and bad information, we know the vaccines have no effect against Omicron, against stopping the infection or the transmission. There's a new study out of England that repeated booster shots destroy your natural immunity. That just dropped off on Bloomberg the other day. So we have solid information from credible sources, not, you know, fringe websites or something. These are credible researchers, epidemiologists, and esteemed research institutes. Those have to be listened to, it seems to me, at some point as well, and not simply accept some old scientific belief, which is what it is, and make that dogma, while we take dogma and turn it into some, you know, malleable thing.
I think this is an excellent discussion we're having, Raymond. I'm just reading what Pope Francis said to those 183 diplomats. He said vaccines are not a magical means of healing, yet surely they represent, in addition to other treatments that need to be developed, the words of Pope Francis, in this moment, they do represent the most reasonable solution for the prevention of the disease. I think what Pope Francis is saying is that they do reduce serious illness. So yes, we do become infected, but the numbers, I think, Raymond, if I'm not incorrect, the numbers in hospitals with serious illness is certainly not what they were a year ago, certainly not in Italy.
No, they're greatly diminished. Thank God for that. You know, as a mRNA researcher told me not long ago, this was an early Christmas gift to us, Omicron, because of the reduced illness involved, even though it was much more infectious. I want to get your take on a related story. A bishop in southern Italy went so far as to bar unvaccinated priests, religious, and lay people from distributing communion. Monsignor, does that seem extreme to you, given that the vaccinated and unvaccinated alike, as we said a moment ago, can transmit this virus, barring priests from their God-given duties?
It does seem draconian to me, Raymond, yes. But I rather suspect that the bishop was acting out of prudence. Living in Italy, I do know that the state authorities, secular authorities, can be extremely harsh on the church, and they will lock things down if they see the church not acting. You know, numbers are going up, or skyrocketing in Italy at the moment, and I rather suspect that the bishop, even though acting draconianly, is acting out of prudence to prevent further drastic measures coming from his part of Italy, from state authorities. I think we need to be sensitive to that. Local authorities in Italy can be drastic with the church.
Yeah. As Edward reported earlier, the Vatican financial trial, the trial of the century, resumes later this month. How damaging has this corruption trial been to the Vatican's credibility in Europe, Monsignor? It's been reported, obviously, here in the U.S., but most of the faithful are, I think, unaware of the depth of the malfeasance involved, or the individuals, frankly.
Absolutely. I think the Holy See finds itself in a dead end here. We know that malfeasance has occurred. Something rotten is out there. Cardinal Parolin has admitted that. Pope Francis has admitted that effectively. I think the great difficulty, on the one hand, we have Pope Francis and the Church calling for transparency in financial matters, which is a good thing. On the other hand, when that transparency shows up the Vatican, it's a lockdown. We saw that with Cardinal Pell and his efforts to clean up the finances at the Vatican. You know, part of this difficulty, even with the trial going on, Pope Francis is seen as the supreme judge. He's seen as divinely inspired. So his power, in a sense, cannot be subordinated to any human power. So there's really a big resistance for him being called as a witness in this trial. Well, that's damaging to the credibility of transparency, the credibility of the church as speaking the truth. And I don't think that's going to sit very well with temporal secular powers. We've seen that happen with the sexual abuse crisis. Someone as powerful as the former Cardinal McCarrick completely falling from grace and now being really subject to secular authorities. I imagine the same is going to happen with the Vatican finances.
Yeah, and Monsignor, just so the audience understands, there are defendants here that claim the Pope himself approved some of these investments and the movement of these funds. So that's why some are saying his testimony is important to the outcome of this trial. We'll see what happens. Before I go, the Pope's motu proprio restricting the Latin Mass continues to be controversial. Some prelates are asking that it be rescinded, Archbishop Schneider, while others are implementing it to the letter. I'm interested in hearing how Rome is receiving this. Is there an understanding among curial officials and those near the Pope how this is being received in dioceses and among the faithful?
I had lunch with Cardinal Sarah today, and Cardinal Sarah, a saintly man who certainly will not criticize Pope Francis, but he raised a very good point. He said, I think there's great confusion where some of these decisions are coming from, and even more importantly, who they're coming from. You know, when the fruit is good, certainly in terms of the traditional Mass, why do we put the brakes on it and try to eliminate it? The same with Masses celebrating the crypt of St. Peter's. The same question was raised with Cardinal Sarah, And quite frankly, I spoke today with the Vatican official who has been arranging these masses and permitting them for some 30 years now. And he was almost crying as he said to me, the most difficult thing I have to do now is to tell a priest that he cannot celebrate the Eucharist in the crypt of St. Peter's Basilica, the mother church of Christianity. And certainly that raises huge question marks about why this has come about and who is behind these decisions.
Yeah, no, it's very troubling. And of course, the faithful here are gobsmacked by it. They don't understand why this is happening, given, as you said, the good fruits that come out of those communities. And these are very small groups and pockets of faithful who love the silence and the sacrality and the tradition. I'm not sure what is achieved by reopening these liturgical wars. But again, another story we'll keep our eye on. Before we run out of time, there was an article in this week's Wall Street Journal reporting on the Catholic Church's decline in Latin America. Brazil is set to become a minority Catholic country by year's end, losing formerly Catholic faithful to conservative Pentecostals. All this despite a pope who hails from the region. How serious are the losses the church is experiencing there, and how great a blow is this to the Church Universal, Monsignor?
I remember a cardinal in Rome back in the 1960s. I wasn't around then, but I've heard what he said back in the 60s, looking at the situation in Rome. Are we fishers of men, or are we keepers of an aquarium where the fish are slowly and somewhat very quickly dying out now? So the situation is extremely serious, because it's not only a loss of numbers, but more seriously, it's a loss of the doctrine and teaching of the Roman Catholic Church. And that has huge repercussions on the moral life. That has huge repercussions on what we hand down to future generations in a society that, you know, has completely accepted gay marriage and has completely lost the territories, quite frankly, on abortion. We're losing people whom we need to catechize. And I go back to what I said earlier. We need to catechize the world rather than allowing the world to catechize us. And certainly, talking with Cardinal Sarrat today, he made a very strong point to me. You know, in front of synodality, he says, we need to incarnate the word of God. I mean, all this consultant jargon and corporate buzzwords about synodality, the church does not belong to us. The church belongs to Christ. So before we listen to each other, we need to listen to Christ, and we need to let others know his teaching has been faithfully expounded by the Roman Catholic Church for 2,000 years. We do not need to reinvent the wheel. We need to give that truth faithfully.
Monsignor Anthony Figueiredo, a great place to stop, and it reminds me of a scripture I read about the Israelites, and you know, they went out to war and they stopped listening to God but decided to do their own thing, and they were obliterated. So a great cautionary word in this new year. I thank you, Monsignor Figueiredo. We'll check in with you in the days ahead.
Thank you, Raymond.